Exodus 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp near Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. They are to encamp by the sea, directly opposite Baal-zephon. Pharaoh will think, 'The Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert.' And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord." So the Israelites did this. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, "What have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services." So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 of the best chariots, along with all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that he pursued the Israelites, who were marching out boldly. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, horsemen and troops, pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they camped by the sea near Pi-hahiroth, opposite Baal-zephon. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians, marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water, so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry land. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, so that they will go in after them. And I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen." Then the angel of God, who had been traveling in front of Israel's army, withdrew and went behind them. The pillar of cloud also moved from in front and stood behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. Throughout the night the cloud brought darkness to one side and light to the other side, so neither went near the other all night long. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind, and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued them, and all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. He jammed the wheels of their chariots so that they had difficulty driving, and the Egyptians said, "Let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen." Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived. But the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses his servant.
It says here ham in the ham in by the desert. What does this mean?
Verse 3.
Yes.
Pharaoh, and by the way, Pharaoh is the name of the king of Egypt. And archaeology tells us that this was indeed the name they called the king of Egypt during a certain period of their history. And so whoever wrote this passage, this book of Exodus, we believe it's Moses. Moses obviously knew firsthand that this was how the Egyptians called the king, Pharaoh. Okay? And in English we pronounce it now as Pharaoh. So Pharaoh will think the Israelites. The Israelites, by the way, are the people who were Jews. They were the Hebrew people. That's another way to refer to them. They speak the Hebrew language. So the Hebrew people who today they live in Israel, so we call them Israeli. That's the name of their nationality. But in the Bible, they're referred to as the Israelites. They didn't have a nation Israel yet. So the Israelites, the people of Israel, the people who, and Israel is of course the name of the ancestor who was originally called Jacob, and God changed his name to Israel. So the Israelites are the people who were enslaved by Egypt, and they were slaves for 430 years. So chapter 13, they started coming out of Egypt led by Moses, and chapter 14 is the continuation of the story. And they are leaving Egypt, and we are told in chapter 13 they avoided the sea route, which is the easiest route, the straightest route, and it was very easy to travel. It's like I said, like our highway 401. But God did not want them to take that road, because that road was very, obviously because there's a lot of people traveling it, it will be harder for them to escape fast, but also because the army of Egypt had lots of fortresses along the way, army camps along the way, and they would have been attacked along the way. So we are told in chapter 13, in verse 17, God did not allow them to go that way, because he says, if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So they are going up that highway, and instead of going up the highway, they turn down south, and south is the desert, the wilderness, the sea and the wilderness. So if you can imagine the map, it's something like this. Yeah, this is the Mediterranean, and then Israel today, yeah, Palestine and so on is over here. Egypt is over here, and then the sea, the Red Sea, right? So they could have gone up this way, but be attacked all the way. So instead they were going down this way. But this is all desert and sea. So it looks like they are going into a trap. So when we say hemmed in, it's like you're walking into walls all around. The word hemmed in means you are trapped. You're surrounded. Surrounded by what? By sea, by desert. There's no way. There's no way. So why did God ask them to do such a silly thing? Instead of going the straight road up here to their destination, God tells them to go towards the sea and towards the desert. It looks very foolish from a human angle. And Egypt, the king of Egypt said, whoa, they are stupid. They are now hemmed in by the desert and the sea. We can chase them and we can kill them. The thing that soldiers try to avoid is to be hemmed in. But if you're chasing the soldiers, you want them to be hemmed in. No way to go. And so you just attack and they will be dead, yeah? Because they have no way to go. They're hemmed in by the desert on one side, by the sea on the other side.
Same word as hemming your pants.
So it's the same word. I'm trying to think if it's the same meaning. I don't think it's the same meaning.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. There's another.
To close in.
Yeah. To close in. Yeah. I suppose maybe that's.
Well, yeah, if you hem in your shirts, you can't, like if I hem
close
that
it
in
in,
like
yeah.
that and I sew it up and there's a little P inside, there's no way for it to get out.
Yeah, I suppose
It's
that's
hemmed in.
hemmed in, yeah. Okay. So hem, if you have a sleeve like that, yeah, and it's, you know, it's got all the string, so you need to fold it in, fold it up, and then you sew it together. So this is called hemming it in also, yeah, hemming. So yeah, I think it's the same word. Sorry. Yeah. It's hem. To hem it means to seal it up, to close it up so that it won't fray. It wouldn't fray. The string will not go apart and it will destroy the cloth. Okay, so to hem is this thing here, to hem, to make an edge, to close it in. And I taught you two methods of doing Bible study on your own when you read it and you say, okay, now how do I learn something from this passage? And I taught you at first the CIA method, right? You see with the eyes, okay, observe, and then you interpret, you look at the meaning, and then you apply. How does this passage apply to me? What does it teach me? Okay, so CIA or you know, CIA. You see. All right. So the other method I taught you was the spacer method. Right? Remember the spacer method? SPACER. There are 6 questions you ask yourself when you read a passage. After you read it, of course you pray and ask God to guide you, Holy Spirit to show you what the passage means. But it helps to ask some questions. So the first question is S. What does S stand for? Sin. Is there a sin in this passage I should avoid? As you read through this passage, you find some sin. The sin of Pharaoh being rebellious against God, wanting to be God himself. That's a sin. So, okay, I must not have the Pharaoh's sin, the sin of pride, the sin of rebellion against God. P. Promise. Alright? So, is there a promise in this passage that I can claim? And sometimes there will be a passage directly promising. God says to Joshua, for example, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So it's a promise. God says, I will never leave you, I will never abandon you. Sometimes there can be an implied promise. As you see Israel being delivered from Egypt, from slavery, you know the implied promise is God will deliver his people. God will save them. Okay, when they are in trouble, all they need to do, as the Israelites did, cry out to God, and God delivered. So there's a promise to claim. A. Action. Is there an action I should take as a result of reading this passage? Is there an action I should avoid? And sometimes it may overlap with sin. I should not be proud like Pharaoh. I should take action. My action should be, I will, from today onwards, I will do a humble act every morning. I will wash Inkai's shoes every morning. Yeah, you like that? That's just an example. So, is there an action to take? Jesus, when he was telling the story of the Good Samaritan, and then he says to his listeners, who do you think was a good man? And they said, the Samaritan. And Jesus says, go and do likewise. Go and do the same thing he did. Be a good neighbor, love your neighbor. Go and do it. So after reading that passage, he said, oh yes, Jesus, I will love my neighbor. I will now go next door and do something for them. Yeah. So an action to take. Or an action to avoid. I should not send 600 of my best chariots after Israel because I will waste my money. Yeah. So action to avoid. C. A command. Is there a command in this passage that I should obey? Jesus says, go and make disciples of all nations in Matthew 28, verse 19. Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and I will be with you always to the end of the age. So that is a command. Also a promise. I will be with you to the end of the age. So go, command. So as you read the passage, there could also be implied commands. When Jesus, when you read this passage at the end, and because of all the miracles, the Israelites learned to trust Moses and to trust God. And so that is an implied command, perhaps, or an action to take. I will do the same. I will trust God. I will trust the servants of God. Or the implied command to obey God and to obey His servants. Okay? So command. E. An example to follow. Yes. Is there an example to follow here? Or an example to avoid? It could sometimes be that, yeah? Pharaoh is an example to avoid, and Moses is an example to follow. Who trusted God even though they're hemmed in by the desert and the sea. They didn't fear, they didn't lose faith. They didn't say, surrender, turn around and say, Pharaoh, I surrender. Because they had faith that God would deliver. So they are good examples for us in our faith. Okay? R. Revelation. At the end of all that, 5 questions, you still do not find anything. Sometimes you may, sometimes you may not. Doesn't mean you find everything, alright? Don't worry, some passages may not have some things there. But maybe at the end, at least there is one revelation from God. Something God has revealed to you. Today I read a passage, I couldn't find any of the 5, but there is something I learned today. I learned something about Jesus. Jesus is very wise. I learned about Jesus. Jesus is the Son of God. So there is a learning, a revelation from God. And you can, it's very general. It can be something you learn about yourself or all human beings. You learn in Romans, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And the wages of sin is death. So I'm a sinner, I'm a human. I therefore should remember to repent. So you learn something about God, or you learn something about Jesus, learn something about man or yourself, learn something about church, maybe, something about life. How do we live life? Jesus says, love your enemy. If someone hits you on the right, turn your left. Okay, so it may not be easy for me to do, but I clearly hear something, yeah? And do not take revenge. Yeah? Romans 12, verse 19, do not take revenge. Okay, I will not take revenge. Revelation about heaven and earth. There's so many things the Bible does teach us. Okay, so this is a general teaching that you have learned, even after you have answered all the other 5 questions. Okay, so S. Sin. P.
Promise.
Promise. Let's do it together, okay? S.
Absolute.
No. S. Start again. S. Okay, S. All say together. Okay, S.
Sin.
Okay. P.
Promise.
Very good. A.
Action.
Very good. C.
Command.
E.
Example.
R.
Revelation.
Very good. So now you can read the passage on your own. If you still have any questions, you can email me. What's my email? Ask to any questions, ask to at gmail.com. Okay. The other day somebody asked me a very curious question. To me it was curious. Then I realized why. So why is your email address so short? I have people ask me, why is your email address ask-to? You know, it's like, oh, how did you get that? And they would think maybe my A stands for some Christian name, right? And then they try Alphonsus, Alexander.
Like an acronym. It's like an acronym.
It's an acronym. Well, SK is my name, they understand that, but they just try to find what's A. And the reason
Seeker.
I gave this
Ask seeker.
this was my first email. I was a university. I still am a university professor, and the universities were the first people that used the internet, and we were all given emails. And I was from the School of Accountancy, so all the accounting professors had an A at the beginning of their email. That's all. And when I tell my students my email is ask Tor, and they all laugh because any questions, ask Tor. So then this question that surprised me was, how did you get this? You know, it's like so many billions of people now have email from Gmail. So how did you get this? You know, you don't have to add a number 2504 or something else, right? And it's just simply because I was one of those, maybe the first thousands who were asked to do a beta. Okay, so when we do CIA, we see, we observe, we interpret, and we apply. What questions do we ask? What are the questions we ask under this is called inductive Bible study method. So under the inductive Bible study method, what are the questions we ask? Remember Mr. Howe, his wife, and his 5 daughters. Okay? How? Why? Because the wife is always asking the husband, why? So how, why? And who are the 5 daughters? Who, what, when, where, which, who, what, where, when, what, which, who, what, when, who, where, which.
It's the hall and five Bibles.
Who,
That's fine.
where, when,
You get it?
what,
That's what I was thinking.
and which. Okay? And
Maybe that's
how,
why I'm not married.
why. And usually, why will be interpretation. You ask the meaning. What's the meaning? Why is it like this? So usually the why is an interpretation question. How did it happen? Can be a factual question. Yeah.
Maybe there's no witch. Is there a witch?
Yeah. Yes.
Who, where, when, what, which.
Oh, okay.
1, 2, 3,
Why
4,
is the
5.
wife? Okay, okay.
Why?
Why is the wife?
Why is the wife?
Why is the wife?
Why is it?
The husband, the wife, and the 5 daughters.
Yes,
Okay, so what happened here? That's one question. You see, the observation questions are factual. You just need to look at a passage and observe. Okay, so you read and say, how many chariots did Pharaoh send? 600. What chariots were they?
His best.
Which chariots were these? Or you can, yeah, what or which chariots were these? These were his best chariots. So which? So that's the question. When did this happen? Where did it happen? Where did they go to? So these are observation. As you read the passage, you don't have to guess. In fact, if you're guessing, you're wrong. You should just look at the passage and this passage tells me this. It is there. Okay, so then you can say, okay, verse 7 says this. And then you look at why did, and sometimes the why questions are answered. Why did Pharaoh chase after Israel with his 600 best chariots? That's a why question, but in this case, the why is answered in the passage. Right? What's the answer in the passage? Why did Pharaoh send his best chariots?
He wanted to chase after the Israelites.
He wanted to go after the Israelites. They have been moving for quite a few days already. They're way ahead of him, so he needs to chase up. So he needs chariots. Could be one why, yeah. But that's an interpretation already. You are thinking, okay, long distance, why? Okay, this is the answer. But I'm saying, in the passage itself, there is a why explained to us. Clue is in verse 5. He had lost their services, so he wants them to come back.
Yeah.
Hey, I changed my mind. I want you all to come back. I let you go, but I changed my mind. Okay, so that's the why explained in the passage. Pharaoh says, I am not letting them go. I am chasing them back. So that's the why. The other why is, of course, they have gone some distance. He needs to chase up very fast. So he needs wheels. They don't have wheels. They are on foot. So he'll be able to chase up. Okay, so that's an interpretation question. Why did this happen? Why did he do it? And then when you look at an application, how does this apply to me? What have I learned from this passage? Okay, those are the questions. Okay, what do I learn? I guess I learned that you must be patient because, when you're frightened, God has the answer, but you just need to be patient to wait for His answer. So that could be one application of this whole passage. Okay, so let's do it systematically. Let's do it right from the beginning to observe. First question, who are involved in this passage? God is one, yes. Pharaoh, Israelites, Moses, Egyptian army, yes. Pharaoh, yes. Aaron, yes. Because even though it's not mentioned, Aaron is there. Yeah, yeah, very good. Sometimes, it's the character behind the scene. Yeah. Who else?
Servants.
Israelites mentioned, yeah. Servants.
Of Pharaoh.
Or servants of Pharaoh, yeah. The officials and the servants of Pharaoh, yeah.
Angel of God.
Angel of God, verse 19. Some of you may have missed it. There is an angel of God in verse 19. Alright, so these are all the characters of the movie.
Animals,
Cows, yeah, sheep, camels. Okay, but I said who, I didn't say what. Okay, horses, they're not who though.
dogs,
Not
cats.
people, that's right. Okay, so where?
The desert, Red Sea.
Red Sea? Hahiroth?
The wilderness.
The wilderness? All correct?
In desert.
Yeah, in the desert, yes, all correct. Say in verses 11 and 12, we are told it's in the desert or in the wilderness, right? So, wilderness. And in verse 2, we are told it's Pi Hahiroth, and between Migdol and the sea. What sea? Which sea?
Red Sea.
The Red Sea. How do you know it's the Red Sea? It doesn't say that.
It's in the previous week.
Previous passage in the movie. In the previous passage, chapter 13, verse
In
18.
the movie is Green Sea.
Yeah, verse 18. So God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. So they're walking towards the Red Sea. And so, where is the Red Sea? In Egypt. All right. So that's all. That's all. The background, the setting, the geographical setting. It is in Egypt, in an area called Pi Hahiroth, next to the sea called the Red Sea, and it is in the wilderness. When?
Long time ago.
Long time ago in Bethlehem. How long ago? Of course, the year you don't know. The scholars have guessed at a possible year, and one of the possible guesses is 1446 BC. 1446 BC. And how does that happen? Because when you look at 1 Kings chapter 6 verse 6, okay, 1 Kings chapter 6 verse 6 is about Solomon, and Solomon began to build the temple in his 4th year. So Solomon's 4th year of his reign was 966 BC. Okay, we know that from historical records. Solomon was in his 4th year as king, and he started building the temple. And 1 Kings 6:6 says this temple was built 480 years after they left Egypt. So 966 minus 480 gives you 1446 BC. Okay, now that's one calculation. some scholars think that may be too early, and so there are many theories. But we don't really need to know that. If you are doing a Bible study and you're not a scholar and you don't have all these encyclopedias to check, nowadays with Google we can check a lot of things also actually. But if you don't, it's not important. At least we know that it is during the month of Abib, which is the beginning of the religious year of the Jews, because it marks the exodus from Egypt, the escape
What
from Egypt.
what month does that correlate to?
Correlates
For
to
us now?
spring in the solar calendar in Canada. It's about March, April.
Is it March, early April?
Late March, early April, that's right. And it corresponds with the barley harvest in Egypt and Israel, the barley harvest. So the leavened bread is made from barley, it's a barley bread.
So is it supposed to correlate with Easter then?
So the 1 Corinthians 5:7, Paul tells us that Jesus is our Passover lamb, and the gospel writers made it very clear. They identified the Passover feast with Jesus, and the death of Jesus was on the Passover. So Jesus is our Passover lamb. Yeah. So Easter is connected to that. Okay, so all that can be, you're thinking on the when, the timing issue, and this is a very good conclusion. Okay, so you find that some pastors and scholars will tell you that the Old Testament, the New Testament is concealed in the New Testament. Sorry, the New Testament is concealed in the Old Testament. As we read the Old Testament, it's not a waste of time, because inside this is God's gradual revelation of what it means to know Jesus. And we will see tonight one of those pre-insights, you might say, the precursor. Okay, the word is precursor. It is like before Star Wars 3, there's Star Wars 2, yeah? And before Star Wars 2, there's a prequel, Star Wars 1. So the precursor, in the Old Testament, we have a preview of what will happen in the New Testament. And one of those previews is the Passover, the significance and the meaning of the Passover. So then Jesus becomes the Passover lamb. And so in chapters 12 onwards, we start seeing the New Testament message of salvation reflected very, very simply in the story of Exodus. Tonight, as we read the crossing of the sea, okay, as the Egyptians crossed, the sea opened up and then it came back again. And that itself is a precursor to something we'll talk about later on. It's a New Testament passage that mentions this event. Okay, so what is happening? That's still an observation question. Let's go through systematically what's happening. First, what's happening here? Okay, I'll give you the clue, right? Something about leaving. The Israelites are leaving Egypt led by Moses. Okay, so that's the first thing you observe. Secondly, somebody is leaving, somebody is chasing. So the Pharaoh is chasing with his army, including 600 of his best chariots, verses 6 and 7. Okay, so go down systematically. And then next event, what happens? Pharaoh is chasing. Did he manage to chase up? Yes?
No, there's a miracle.
Yeah, but did he catch up with them? Or did he never catch up at all? Verse 9, what does verse 9 say? Yeah, they overtook the Israelites at Pi Hahiroth. It's like, oh, we're stuck because the sea is in front of us, the desert is behind us, and the Egyptian army is closing in. We are hemmed in, yeah? Not just 3 sides, but 4 sides. Egyptian army this side, desert this side, sea this side. They are dead. They're hemmed in, they're trapped. So the Israelites think they're trapped. So what happens to them? they are terrified. Verses 10 to 12. They are terrified. They are frightened like crazy. And so they are frightened. So what happens then? Moses calms them down. Moses tells them, do not be afraid. Verses 13 to 14. And what happens next?
The pillar of cloud blocked the.
Before that, that's going too fast. Yeah, God spoke to Moses, yeah? Verses 15 to 18. God spoke to Moses to instruct the Israelites. This is what I'm going to do. Be calm, do not be afraid, I am in charge. First of all, the pillar of cloud separates the Egyptians from the Israelites so that the Israelites don't get surprised. And in the meantime, what are the Israelites doing?
The refugee parted.
The crossing. Yeah, because Moses has raised his staff and the sea separates and they're walking across and the pillar of cloud is separating them from the Egyptians so the Egyptians cannot chase. And then when they have safely crossed, God lifts the pillar, the Egyptians chase after, they go into the sea, and what happens? Verses 21 to 30. What happens? The sea came back and the Israelites drowned. Yeah? No, the Egyptians drowned. Okay, so the Egyptians drowned, not the Israelites. They are crossed, they are safe, and they are looking back. And that's when they say in verse 31, looking back on the Egyptians drowning, they say, what happens?
Trust in God.
Verse 31, what does verse 31 say?
They saw the mighty hand of God.
Yeah, they saw that God had been fighting for them and they put their trust in God and in Moses. Okay, so that's the observation of what's happening. The movie, this week's episode ends here. Okay, next week, another episode. So like a Korean movie, yeah? Yeah. Wednesday and Friday.